Good morning, and thank you for coming. My name is Tracy Wilson, and I am the Vice President of Public Relations for the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. I am a registered lobbyist, an avid hunter, sport shooter, a mother, and a grandmother. I would like to speak to you today about some concerning developments in the Liberal government's pursuit of licensed gun owners in this country. On August 28th of this year, Prime Minister Trudeau issued a mandate letter to the newly appointed Minister of Border Security and Organized Crime Reduction, Bill Blair. Within that mandate letter was instruction from the Prime Minister to lead an examination of a full ban on handguns and assault weapons in Canada, while not impeding the lawful use by Canadians. Shortly after receiving the mandate letter, Minister Blair stood in committee and stated that he would conduct extensive public consultations before the end of the calendar year, which would include roundtables with experts around the country. He would seek input via an online portal and collect data from other jurisdictions. As of last week, we have been presented with one single event that could be very loosely described as a public consultation, as well as an online survey that anyone in Canada, or any country for that matter, can complete as many times as they wish. And lastly, a promise of more public consultation, but by invitation only. On September 23rd, I drove to Toronto to attend the aforementioned town hall. One would be led to believe this was part of the consultations, as there was an expert panel and Minister Blair was in attendance. Oddly, the only advertising for this event could be found on the website and social media accounts of a Liberal backbencher. That was it. To further erode the legitimacy of this process, no questions were taken from the audience, other than those submitted in writing in advance via a form. The questions were then vetted and chosen by someone. No rebuttals to false information were allowed, nor any opportunity at all to engage the panelists. To make matters worse, there was no representation for the 2.2 million licensed Canadian gun owners, the only people who would be affected by a handgun ban. Nor was there any firearm policy experts on the panel at all. There was not one person on that panel that could accurately describe how to legally transport a restricted firearm to and from a shooting range. Incredibly, there was an expert on the panel that suggested that we should have some form of secure, locked storage for our firearms in our homes, a law that is currently in place already and has been so for decades. How can anyone call for more regulation when they don't even know what the current regulations are? This leads me and most reasonable Canadians to a point where we believe that the government has already made up its mind on this issue, or this is a campaign exercise. There are going to be real impacts on the lives of real Canadians as a result of processes like this. In this case, 2.2 million Canadians. We are very concerned both in the lack of legitimacy and the lack of leadership this government is showing on this file. I'd like to have my colleague, Rod Giltaca, provide some further detail to what I've said here.
Good morning, everyone. I appreciate you coming. My name is Rod Giltaca. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of the CCFR. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm also an instructor in good standing for the RCMP Canadian Firearms Program. I've run about 4,000 students through that program and other training as well. So as mentioned by Ms. Wilson, I'd like to provide a little bit more detail concerning the town hall that she attended. So she had mentioned that there was some false information being presented, and that's actually true. Some of you might remember the litany of references to the more than half of crime guns are domestically sourced, right, above 50%, or they're being stolen from licensed gun owners and used by gangs, or gun owners are actually buying guns for gangs, so straw purchases. All of these statements were designed specifically for one purpose, and that's to convince Canadians with no topic knowledge that licensed gun owners are the problem and that they should be supportive of new regulation no matter what it is, without question. Now, as it turns out, via an ATIP request to the Toronto Police Service, domestically sourced firearms represent actually under 9% of the so-called crime guns. And as it happens, that 9% includes starter pistols, pellet guns, replicas, toy guns, a myriad of other things that aren't actually even firearms. So that leaves me kind of curious. What is the actual number? Well, we know it's not 9%. We know it's not even that high. So we certainly know that it's not over 50%, which is a figure that Minister Blair repeated over and over again, even though that ATIP was circulating around in the media. So I think, to speak candidly, this type of behavior by those in charge, and those by extension who should be beyond reproach, it's a real problem. Mr. Blair is also responsible for examining a potential ban on assault weapons. An online survey backgrounder defines assault weapon as follows. In general, assault weapons are semi-automatic firearms with a large magazine of ammunition that were designed and configured for rapid fire. This actually isn't a Canadian definition. This is from the U.S. Department of Justice, and I believe that definition is around 25 years old. So the problem for us is it describes pretty much any semi-automatic firearm in Canada, except for the fact that our magazines are limited to 5 rounds. So now we move from this absurd and completely ambiguous definition to the online server, where Mr. Blair hands it to Canadians, again with no topic knowledge, so that they can chime in and help reshape the lives of 2.2 million Canadians. So here's what we know for certain. Public safety says law enforcement agrees there's some kind of consensus that a handgun ban would be useful. Although many influential law enforcement leaders have said the opposite, including the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, the high-ranking officers within the Toronto Police Service, where all this shooting is going on, and even the RCMP commissioner herself. So apparently there isn't a consensus. Here's something else we know. Minister Goodale hosted the Summit on Gun and Gang Violence last spring. Ms. Wilson was in attendance there, and she participated in workshop activities with anti-violence advocates and victims groups, all in an effort to find solutions to present to the minister for funding. There were hundreds of experts gathered there, yet not one of them openly asked for a handgun ban. So how can that be? How's that possible? So that's an interesting question in itself. Another verifiable fact. For almost 3 years, Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale has been promising and re-promising the $327.6 million, for some reason, funding for law enforcement, gang units, border protection, and community outreach programs. They've announced it probably 10 times with great fanfare that they're doing something about the gang problem. It was in fact an election promise 3.5 years ago, and so far they've given out $1 million, 327th of what they promised nearing 4 years ago. So for some reason, I'm not running the government, so I don't want to be overly rhetorical, but for some reason this government has money for everything else except to fund an assault on the gangs, the exact people that are responsible for this so-called surge in gun violence. So last fact for today, and this is actually really important. If you broke into someone's home, you stole a firearm, you got into a vehicle, and you committed some kind of crime with it. So let's say, for instance, drive-by shooting. You would be liable to 2 life sentences and an additional 73 years in jail if all 12 applicable charges were prosecuted as indictable offenses. That's in our current system today. So a little fun fact is Canada has some of the most severe penalties for unauthorized possession and misuse of firearms in the civilized world today, right now. So our problem isn't that we don't have enough regulation. We have a variety of other problems, and none of them are connected to firearm regulation. So I'd like to close with this. Licensed gun owners in Canada are everyday Canadians that want a safer Canada too. I haven't asked Ms. Wilson whether she, this question, but I'm assuming I know her answer. I don't think that she's interested whatsoever in getting into the middle of a gunfight in Byward Market while she's going to buy a pair of shoes or take her daughter for dinner. So if we thought that a handgun ban, handguns, by the way, are essentially already banned. So even if we thought that a double, triple, or quadruple handgun ban would result in changing the behavior of gangs, we would be advocating for it, not against it. So here's what we'd like from the government. 3 quick things. Number one, conduct a fair and open consultation if that's the way they intend to proceed with this exercise, and make sure they include the scrutiny that is absolutely essential for proper policy making. Also, we'd like them to include actual experts in the policies that they intend to revise. Include the stakeholders that are going to be affected by these changes. I know it sounds unreasonable, but these are actions we think are pretty common sense. Implement a completely inflexible policy of honesty in all matters concerning this issue, and fulfill a now long forgotten Liberal campaign promise of fact-based policymaking. It might be a good re-election strategy for them. Maybe it's time to do something a little bit different. So, to conclude, as an organization, the CCFR stands ready to assist in any possible way that we can, whether it's public debate, whether it's policy advising, whether it's... We're here to help in any possible way to reduce violence with or without firearms in Canada. So we have a fact sheet for you all here with citations on everything that we've said in this commentary. So we'd be happy to give a copy of that to you. Really appreciate y'all coming, and I'd be pleased to answer any of your questions.